Well, Sri Lankans are heading to the polls, voting in a parliamentary election just 2 months after Anura Kumara Dissanayake was elected as the country's president. There had been heightened security across polling venues around the country, with 17 million people expected to cast their ballots to decide which candidates will win one of the 225 seats in the parliament. For more, I'm joined live from Colombo by Bhavani Fonseca, senior researcher at Centre for Policy Alternatives. Bhavani, good to have you on the program this evening. Now, President Disanayake's National People's Party coalition only has 3 seats in a 225-member parliament, so no surprises. He's calling a snap poll to get more of his members in, and there are predictions he might even win a majority. But how realistic is that prospect?
Well, he called a quick poll soon after the presidential in September, purely in terms of the momentum they had in the wake of the presidential election and that very big victory. But and it's expected, of course, for the NPP to do much better than getting 3 seats. The question is what kind of majority that they get the 113 or more seats required to form a comfortable majority in parliament. And this is what we'll see in the next couple of hours. Polls will close in about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll know results in a couple of hours' time. So the next couple of hours is critical to see how the NPP does in this election.
And what happens in the case that his party doesn't get a majority? Who would he possibly rope in to be part of at least a parliamentary coalition?
Well, the NPP officially and publicly has not said anything about coalitions. They are hoping for a victory so that they form the government and they don't have to rely on anyone. But, they've been talking to various other members or former members of parliament who are in the running at the present moment. And I think it's very important that while the NPP, that's Disanayake's party, does pretty well in this election, that we also have a very strong opposition in parliament, and there are checks on the executive presidency. So again, it's hard to say who is going to be in the government, in cabinet, but one assumes the president's party will do much better than the last election. But who is going to end up in parliament, who is going to be ending up in key positions in parliament is to be seen.
So is President Disanayake's momentum, is that rolling on towards this parliamentary poll as what he enjoyed in the presidential election?
Well, President Dissanayake has been campaigning heavily in the lead up to today's poll, and he's been across the country in most districts. On Sunday, he was in the north in 2 big rallies, and I think it's safe to say that his party will do much better in areas that they didn't do well so in the past. So he is on a momentum. He individually seems to be able to get a lot of crowds into these rallies. Whether that translates into seats is to be seen. But he does have star power, and I think the NPP is relying on that factor.
Of course, this big change in Sri Lanka's political system with a new party, a new president. A lot of this has been happening because of this crippling economic crisis. Now, what are some of the reforms he's hoping to get across?
So you're quite right. In terms of the economic recovery phase, this is the first parliamentary election after the economic crisis and the second national election after that crisis. And the president's mandate leading to the presidential and even now is massive reforms, massive governance reforms, addressing the economic issues. So he is looking to a mandate in parliament to carry these proposals through, and with a comfortable majority that is possible. And these are going to be reforms that's going to be hard-hitting next year. So I guess what the government wants, or the President Dissanayake wants, is having that majority to carry through some proposals, policies, reforms that are not going to be very popular next year.
And one of the things that he originally proposed was to change some of the provisions in the IMF bailout deal, in the months after the fall of the Rajapaksa government. He's now backing away from that. Is that going to be a big factor in the minds of voters?
I think the voter is looking for a change, and I think that that's clear. They're not looking at specific policies per se, the general public. And what the NPP, what President Dissanayake offers is a change from the usual political culture that we have seen in the last few decades. And at the moment, that seems to be having traction with the voter. Now, in the next couple of weeks and months, that's where many questions are going to be asked. And the first test would be the vote of accounts that will have to be passed soon after Parliament meets. So the hard questions will be later. Now it's more about people wanting a change.
And Bhavani, can you give us a sense of how difficult it's been in Sri Lanka, particularly for a government that's having to adhere to the provisions of the IMF bailout that's been a burden on the general population?
Well, as I said, we're still in the economic recovery phase, but there is a marked difference to 2 years ago when many of us were staying in line and getting essential items was quite a challenge. Now people are still struggling, and I think that's something important to recognize. And in a couple of months, it was I don't think anyone was expecting the president and a 3-member cabinet to make a massive change. So one recognizes the challenges, and as I said, it's going to be next year really when the government and the president is held to account. But we also need to remember we're going to have local government elections early next year. So we are going to have another cycle of elections next year where voters can decide. But the president and his small government at present have had a huge challenge in addressing a multiple range of issues. But so far, people are saying they need to be given another chance. So let's see what happens in the next couple of hours.
Yeah, and speaking of chances, a lot of the blame has been on the Rajapaksas. Their party, the SLPP, they currently have a majority, but they're not fielding a single candidate this time round. Does it mean that the Rajapaksas and their party are just basically blown into political oblivion, or would we expect them to be still around in the background?
No, the SLPP is contesting, and they are in the running this election. It doesn't have the same traction as before. We have Namal Rajapaksa, who's in the national list, and he's been campaigning. So there are Rajapaksas still in the fore, but I would say they have lost that momentum they had in the last few decades. And the questions of corruption, of economic crimes, of misuse of public property, they're very much in people's minds. And they see the Rajapaksas as a direct link to the economic crisis.
Okay, Bhavani Fonseca, really good to get your analysis. Thanks very much.
Thank you.